Full topic today, don't we? The second coming of Jesus Christ. It's always a good thing to think about. And I don't know if you heard the joke about the kindergarten or Sunday school class, and the teacher was giving a lesson on how God created the world, and he told how God took a rib out of Adam's side and made Eve his wife. And not too long after that, one of the little boys who had been particularly fascinated with how God created the world and how God took a rib out of Adam's side and made his wife. And a little later, that little boy, he was at home, and he's laying, and he's acted as if he's sick. And so his mom came and said, "What's the matter with you?" And he says, "I have a pain in my side. I think I'm going to have a wife." Well, the little boy heard the story right, but he just drew the wrong conclusions. The same can be true of Jesus' second coming. Some might hear the story that he will return and conclude that that they should withdraw from the world. Nothing can be farther from the truth. Jesus tells us about his return, and so it should motivate us to go into the world and bless the world. So I'm going to title this message, "Be Ready, Be Involved," out of Matthew 25. If you want to use one of the Bibles, on the back of the chairs is page 1540. Page 1540. Now this chapter neatly goes into three sections. A story about 10 young ladies, a story about 3 men who are given talents by a king or a man, and then the last part is kind of more like Jesus' teaching, but clearly 3 sections. And each section builds on the next one. Okay, I think you're going to see that. The first section teaches something, the next one adds something to that, and the next one adds something to that. And it's all related to Jesus' return. So let's begin reading in chapter 25, verse 1. "At that time the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom." This is a story about 10 maidens then. And let's read what happens. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. The foolish ones took their lamps but did not take any oil with them. The wise, however, took oil in jars along with their lamps. The bridegroom was a long time in coming, and they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight the cry rang out, "Here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all the virgins woke up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish ones said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, our lamps are going out." "No," they replied, "there may not be enough for both of us and you. Instead, go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves." But while they were on their way to buy the oil, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later the others also came. "Sir, sir," they said, "open the door for us." But he replied, "I tell you the truth, I don't know you. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour." Now, the story talks about, it says, "At that time the kingdom of heaven will be like." What time is he talking about? What is he comparing this to? Well, if you go back to the last chapter, it talks about what? Jesus' return. At what time? The time of his return. Because you go just a couple verses prior in chapter 27. It says, verse 50, "The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him." The day he returns. So that's what he's talking about. At that time, at the time of Christ's return. So at the time of Christ's return, he's using this story to illustrate what it's going to be like on the day he returns. What's it going to be like when he comes back? Now, this story gives us a number of comparisons between Christ's return and this situation, everyday situation in their day, of Jesus' day, that had parallels to it. And then he draws a conclusion from his story in verse 13. First, let's look at the comparison. The groom is away and comes unexpectedly. That's just like Jesus is gone away, right? And he's going to come back unexpectedly. We see that last part of verse 1 where it says, "The bridegroom went away," in verse 6, at the midnight cry, the bridegroom all of a sudden appears. The next comparison would be, there's people waiting for the return. 5 are foolish and ready, and foolish weren't ready, and the wise were wise and were ready. So at Christ returns, there will be some people who are ready for His return, and some will not be. Then we see that what happens after He returns, that they go into the banquet, and what? The door is shut. There comes a time at which it is too late. The foolish who were not ready found out after the door had been shut, it was too late. So when Christ returns, there will come a point in life where the opportunities to know Him will be closed, because He has returned and will judge mankind. Shut the door. There's a finality about it. They tried to get in at that point, but could not. It's kind of like on July 25th, 2000, Air France Concorde Flight 459 crashed on takeoff in Paris. 100 passengers were killed along with 9 crew and 4 people on the ground as the Concorde banked and stalled and then crashed. But the last thing that the pilot said was this. It's interesting. He said, "Too late." There came a point in which he was struggling to land that plane and keep people alive, and he realized at one point it was too late to do anything. And that's what Jesus said. And just as Jesus' story, there came a point when it was too late for the maidens to join the wedding. And just as there came a point in which it was too late to save Flight 459 of Air France, so will come a point in time when it will be too late to make a choice for Christ and be saved. So we see these comparisons. The groom is away and he comes back unexpectedly. There's people who are ready, there's people who are not. There's going to come a point in which it'll be too late to make the decision. So why is he telling this story then? Verse 13, he gives us the conclusion. Look at this closely. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour. So he tells a story that has comparisons between this wedding and Jesus' return. At that time, the time of Jesus' return, he says in verse 1, there's a bunch of parallels, but he's leading to one point he's trying to make, and that is, be ready. Keep watch. Why? Because you don't know when he will return. Why were the 5 not ready? The Bible doesn't tell us. Why? Because his main point is to be ready. But why weren't they ready? Well, why are some people not going to be ready when Christ returns? I would imagine some of them it's going to be because they procrastinated. Well, I know I should serve God, and I know I should do this, but I want to do some other things right now. So I'm going to put it off just a little bit longer, and a little bit longer. And there's going to come a day when Christ comes and there's no opportunity for longer. He's not, because he's going to come. So we must be ready. We don't really know why, but everybody will not be ready because they'll have their own decisions, but each one of us can be ready. And that's what Jesus is trying to encourage us to do. So, when he comes back and if we're ready, what's he going to be looking for? What's going to be happening? We need to keep watch by using the resources God has given us, because we will give an account. That's going to be the point of the next story. First story is what? Be ready, he's coming back, because you don't know when he's coming back. And the next story is, what do you got to do while you're waiting? How do you be ready? Let's read in verse 14. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another one talent, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received the 5 talents went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also the one with the 2 talents gained 2 more. But the man who had received the 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received the 5 talents brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with the 2 talents also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 talents. See, I've gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received the 1 talent came. Master, he said, I know that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you. His master replied, You wicked, lazy servant, you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned I would have received it back with interest. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has the 10 talents. For everyone who has been given more, for everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him, and thrown that worthless servant outside in the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, this is a story illustrated by a story about a master and his 3 servants. And notice this starts off with again. Again it will be like, what's he talking about? The very thing he said in the last time. At that time what? At the time of Christ's return. Again it will be like. So he's going to use another story to say what it's going to be like when Jesus returns. See how they're going to build on each other. The first one says, be ready because you don't know. This one's going to have another point about Jesus' return. And let's look at the comparisons now that lead to the main point. A man has a servant who gives them talents. Talent was a weight of money, basically. And God has given each of us resources. How many know each of us have some type of resource? Whether it's funds, financial funds, or maybe it's talents or opportunities, whatever they are, whatever your resources are, He's given you things. And so the talents there are the same thing as there's a similarity here. Just as this master gave his servants some things, God has given us some things. Okay? That's the first parallel. Next one, the man goes on a journey, and when he returns, he calls his servants to account. That's exactly what Jesus is going to do. He went away to heaven, he's going to come back, and when he comes back, what's he going to do? Say, answer up for what I gave you. What did you do with it? Did you do anything with what I gave you? Just as in the story, a man is called to account, so we will be called to account. The next point of parallel is the servant who used their resources or talents to make more were declared good and faithful. And those who didn't use what God had given them were not declared good and faithful. They were declared what? Lazy. But what a wonderful thing to be declared good and faithful when God returns. See, He's going to come back one of these days and He's going to say, what did you do with what I gave you? And that's the parallel here. And it's a very obvious parallel. He's going to call us to account. And the servant who didn't use his talents is in verse 24 through 27. And what does the master say? You wicked, lazy servant. Up before he had said in verse 21, you have been faithful with a few things. You're good. Well done, good and faithful servant. Verse 21. So there's going to be 2 declarations. Just in the prior stories, there was one who were ready and those who weren't. In the next story, there's the 2 groups too. One is declared good and faithful. Other one's declared wicked and lazy. And what is the difference? It's that the one used what God had given them and the other one didn't. That's the big difference. And that's what we got to make sure is we're using what God has given us. So those are the kind of like the parallels leading to the main point, and the main point then is in verse 29 and verse 30. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him, and throw that worthless servant outside in the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So Jesus tells this story to tell us this. When He comes, those who haven't used what God has given them, what little they have will be taken from them. Because they didn't use it. What was the purpose of them even having it? And those who use what God has given them, He'll bless them with far more. And those who don't use what God has given them, He says they're going to be cast out into a terrible place where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. So the first story tells us what? Be ready. The next story says what? When we're called to account, some are going to be blessed with more, and some, the little they have, is going to be taken from them, and they're going to be cast into outer darkness. That's what's going to happen when Jesus returns. He's trying to help us understand that. So then the next thought is, well, okay, if I got to be ready, and I got to use what God has given me, what's He want me to do with it? That's the logical next step, right? If I want to be ready and He's given me stuff, I got to then ask Him, what does He want me to do with it? Well, He's going to tell us here very shortly. But the point is, we must use what He has given us. It's kind of like Dr. Scott Kurtzman. He was the chief of surgery at Waterbury Hospital. And he was scheduled to give a speech at 8 o'clock one morning. But on his way to work, he ran across one of the worst auto accidents in Connecticut history. There was a number of cars and people injured and all kinds of things. So he stopped and he began to help the people. And he helped get them all ready so they stabilized, so they could get in the ambulance and get to the hospital. And that took them a while. And finally, when everyone was in their ambulance and off and going, he finally then went in and gave a speech some 2 hours late. But this was his comment concerning those kinds of things, and I find it very interesting. He says, a person with my skills simply can't drive by someone who's injured. I refuse to live my life that way. I pray that each of us has the same attitude as Dr. Scott Kurtzman. We refuse to live our lives in such a way as to drive by people whom we have the ability to help, whom God has given us the resources to bless. The older person struggling with the door while we're strong and young and we whiz past them. Or the child trying to catch their puppy and we just go on our merry way. Or the person who is distraught and has no peace, and we know the Prince of Peace. See, that's what are we doing with what He has given us? Are we trying to bless others, or just trying to me, my few around me? We must say, God, what do you want me to do? And then he goes into this teaching in the last part of the chapter to tell us and define more clearly what He's expecting of us, what He wants us to do with what the resources that He has given us. So let's read that now. Verse 31. When the Son of Man comes, see, notice again He's talking about the same thing when Jesus returns. When the Son of Man comes in His glory and all the angels with Him, He will sit on His throne in heavenly glory. All the nations will be gathered before Him, and He will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on His right and the goats on His left. Have you noticed in all three of these things, the two stories and now His teaching, there's always two groups of people? The wise and unwise. One was ready and one wasn't. One was using the resources they had, another one wasn't. One was like a sheep and one was like a goat, and they're going to be separated at the end, is what He's trying to say. Now, shepherds in those days, often when they went out in the fields, would have sheep and goats together. But it's my understanding, I've never been a shepherd or a goat herder, so I don't know, I just read these things. But what they tell me is that sheep, the cold doesn't bother them near as much as it does the goats. You can probably guess why. You know? So when they separate them, they have to keep the goats in a much warmer place at night when it gets cool. Now, some of you experience that every night you go to bed. One side of the bed has no covers, the other side's got about this high, right? And so, anyhow, the sheep and goats, they're different that way, so they separate them out. Same thing's going to happen at the end. There's going to be two groups and there's going to be a separation. Right now, they're all together. Some of you live right next to some very nice Christians, and you might live right next to the most ornery man or woman on the face of the planet, you feel like. You know, and that's the way it is. We bump and rub shoulders, but you never know who's going to come to know Christ either. You just don't know these things. So anyhow, this last section, then Jesus goes on to say in verse 34, Then the King will say to those on His right, Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me, and I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Here, Jesus goes on to say that this is going to be for all nations. The King's going to That's what it says in verse 32, all nations he was going to do this to. He's going to judge all mankind, in other words. And then he tells us some are like the sheep and some are like the goats. What are the sheep like or the goats like? And he first starts off with those who are going to be blessed, the sheep. We presume it would be the sheep. Anyhow, the sheep, because us often we're called he's our shepherd. But they're going to be blessed by God. They'll receive the kingdom. They ministered to the needs of others with what God had given them. Notice that what he says. Come, you are blessed. Why? For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. In other words, we met the needs of those around us with what we had. And I think that could go for both spiritual and physical needs. You can be spiritually hungry. You can be physically hungry. How many of those sometimes are very tied together too? So how do they know we love them? It's by often how we meet their needs, how we reach out to them. And in this section, if you read this section, he says the same thing basically 4 times. How many knows if in just a matter of 15 verses, you take 2 verses and do it about 4 times? So half of the thing is saying the thing over and over again. So his point is this. For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you took me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. In other words, you saw a need and tried to meet it. That is what we must be about. And that's what he says, that same thing over, because look in verse 37. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king replied, I'll tell you the truth, whatever you did for one least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. Notice so how in telling this, he says the same thing basically twice. And then he's going to do it 2 more times. Are you beginning to get the flow of this chapter? The first story, be ready because you don't know when he's come. Just like those 2 groups of maidens. One was ready and wasn't. Then he goes to the next story. When he comes, he's going to call us to account, and those who have used wisely what he has given them, he will bless them with much more. Those who didn't use wisely what he had given, what little they have is going to be taken from them. They're going to be cast in eternal fire. Now, how do you know what you're supposed to be doing? Jesus here tells us. Did you feed someone who was hungry? Physical, spiritual, whatever hunger they have. They were thirsty, thirsting for the waters of life, or thirsty for actual drink. They're a stranger. Did you invite them in? Oh, it's easy to greet people you know. Greet those who you don't know. Did you clothe them? Did you look after them when they were sick? When they were in prison, did you go visit them? The problem is that can be a challenge. How many knows it's not always easy to make ends meet in your own life, let alone trying to bless someone else, but that's what we're called to do. Another thing is we got to be aware of what I call passion fatigue. We hear, how many have heard of a need lately? Can you meet every single need? No. But you can meet someone's need. So be careful about passion fatigue. I was reading about a nurse by the name of Patricia Miller, and she was working in the emergency room. And she said that she'd been working there for 5 years, and she began to notice how calloused she was becoming towards those who came in the emergency room. And it kind of peaked one day when she was doing paperwork with a mother of this mother had a daughter who had some children, so it was a single mom, and her mother, the mother of the single mom had tried to commit suicide. And so the mom was there, and she was doing the paperwork for this mom whose daughter had tried to commit suicide. And as she's going through the paperwork, and the mom was so broken up she couldn't hardly answer the questions. You know, you can imagine what it'd be like. And in her mind, the only thing was, come on, lady. And she wasn't saying it out loud, but she was saying, come on, lady, hurry up, I got to get this done. And all of a sudden she felt as God spoke to her and said, did you even look at her? did you even look at her? And so she says, Lord, I'm sorry. And so she then reached out to that lady and held her hands and began to talk to her and listen to her. And she said, I care, don't give up. And by the time she was done listening to this lady thanked her so much for listening. That's the story told in the Pentecostal Evangelium a few years ago. But just as Patricia began to become hardened to the medical and emotional needs of others, the same can happen to us. We can begin to presume that everyone just deserves whatever happens to them in life. We must continually go back and listen to the Lord. Let Him remind us of how much He loves us and how much He loves those around us. Now, we're not advocating for empowering laziness or anything like that. If you know me, I'm not into that. But there's so many people with so many needs and are hurting so much. We need to say, God, give us the wisdom. Help us to continue to have passion and compassion for people. That we will continue to reach out. We will demonstrate our genuine faith by our loving acts towards others. See, when Jesus is telling us this, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat, He's not talking about earning our salvation. He's talking about the concept found in James chapter 2 and verse 2, which says, faith without deeds is useless. James goes through and argues, you say you have faith. If there's no deeds to follow it, your faith is worthless. It's not saving faith. Because he says, the devils believe in God. How many knows that's true? They know He's real. I believe in God. Yes, that's good. But unless it is followed by works that demonstrate our faith, there's no saving faith there. That's what He's trying to say. That's why Jesus says, I was hungry and you gave me something. In other words, your lifestyle reflected a faith that was life-changing. Good works will not lead to salvation, but salvation will always lead to good works. Belief only leads to heaven if it is followed by the obedience of good works. And that's what He's trying to tell us here. So, if the worship team would come back, we've seen this hopefully you've seen in these three stories, three things. First one is, there's two groups of people. One's going to be ready and one's not. So what? Be ready, watchful. Remember we shook hands and said, are you ready? Be ready. We was encouraging each other to be ready. Why? Because when He does come back, what? He's going to call us to account. He's going to say, what did you do with the talents, the resources I gave you? And what's the question about what did we do with the resources He gave us? Did we feed the hungry? Did we clothe those who needed clothing? Did we minister to those around us? That's what He's going to ask. And He will then reward us for having served Him faithfully because we've come to believe in Him. Belief in Him always results in changed actions. It always does. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Well, we've already had an altar time, but I think it's just just sit and you can obviously come forward if you want. I wouldn't stop that. But let's just, as we sing the next song or two here, let's just reflect on our own life. God, what am I doing right now? How am I using my resources that You have given me to further Your kingdom and bless the lives of those around me? Have I given anything monetarily to help somebody lately? Have I given any time lately to help somebody? Have I used any resource I have to help somebody lately? Lord, help us to do that, we pray. Could you just lead in a song? And let's just worship the Lord.